Good evening. This is Tyler Steves, and you're listening to Wilder Future, the show where we explore the bleeding edge of science and technology for a regenerative future amongst the stars. And today we are so pleased to have Cameron Smith here, who is literally doing work that will put us into that living in the stars situation. So, Cameron is an extremophile. He has gone to the Arctic, deep underwater, way up into the sky. If it's extreme, it seems like Cameron may have done it. He is currently inventing a new form of spacesuit, which essentially democratizes the spacesuit 10 times, decreasing the cost of spacesuits, as well as some other work like working on Hyperion, which is a genetics project for the future of humanity going into space. I'm absolutely blown away by the work that you're doing, and I can't wait to get into it. Cameron, thank you for joining me.
Wow, Tyler. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. And, it all plugs into actually exactly what you're doing, which is promoting the wide variety of competencies and technologies that are going to be required for humans beyond Earth, multi-generationally. Um, Project Apollo and the first space race is sort of my guiding light because it worked. It's not a PowerPoint. It worked very well. But it was an approach to space exploration that was episodic. And it's quite amazing. Here we are 50 years later, and there are a lot of people who don't even believe it happened. I work with some people who made it happen, particularly a spacesuit engineer who worked on the liquid cooling for Apollo suits. And unless he's been making it up, and telling lies for the last 50 years. Anyway, the point being, uh, the Arctic and all of these variety of expeditions and projects, they really have to do with trying to contribute a small piece of the puzzle to the human future beyond Earth.
Yeah, and I see that with the projects that you do, and because you have kind of gone into the extremes of the planet, which most people don't even ever really appreciate. I mean, you go out into the cold. I mean, if you've ever, you have, but if you've experienced a minus 50-degree day Celsius, that's a very cold day. And it's the kind of day where without serious clothing, you're getting into actual problematic states quickly. Within an hour, you could be looking at serious damage or worse. And some of your expeditions, I mean, we're talking 30-day expeditions. Is that accurate in Iceland where you're out there carrying all your stuff? It's extremely cold. I mean, you are really pushing yourself up against some of the very real edges of what you can experience on the planet.
Yes, Iceland was 28 days on my final attempt to cross the Vatnajökull ice cap on foot in winter and by myself. And yes, that was on the fourth attempt I made it. The other attempts were sort of 17 days, and one was only 3 days, and I got knocked out by a storm. Um, but it was on that, that expedition really evolved in a very predictable way for a middle class white American guy who started out climbing in Boy Scouts, and then you get a car and you realize, oh, I can go up into the mountains higher away than just rocks. And then you start reading about exploration, and you read about people in the Arctic, right? Antarctica and the Arctic. And then you say, well, maybe I can go to Alaska, or I can go to someplace and do something like that myself. So I was really copying other people. Doesn't mean it wasn't a marvelous expedition, but I was sort of copying other people. And I had a tremendous experience, and that experience of being isolated, pulling this sled with all of my food and my survival, um, uh, and being in the headspace of one radio contact a day to communicate with people, and then really knowing that uh, each decision you have made has consequence. Do I fill the thermos tonight, or should I fill it in the morning? Will it be a little bit cooled off in the morning? Would I rather take the 5 minutes right now to zip my jacket, or should I wear a vest for this morning? Every one of those decisions has consequences. So that was all very good. And there was a moment on that expedition. It was very windy, and the temperatures weren't so low, but they were lower in Alaska. The temperatures weren't so low, but it was always freezing and then thawing, freezing and thawing. So I thought this should be called slush land. The ice was blasting.
Often much worse, and people don't
Oh,
realize, but
oh
it's
yeah,
much worse. Yeah,
oh yeah,
you can't just get used to it and have a stable. Like you look at the worst weather patterns that do the most damage in cities, and it is that exact area where you are on the cusp of freeze thaw freeze. Yeah,
yeah. And hypothermia is right, it's standing on your shoulder, and if you start to get drowsy or whatever, you're in trouble. So there was a moment in that very wild environment where I thought I sort of need a bubble, a protective bubble around me, something like a spacesuit. That was about before 2004, anyway, 2003, something like that. And then when those expeditions and some following ones into Alaska wrapped up, I sort of revived a long-term interest I'd had since I was a kid of having something to do with space exploration, and that led me into space suit technology.
so cool. And it's I've looked at the kind of design of your spacesuits, and it makes so much sense. Like you've got to manage your temperature. And then
Yes,
if it's space and this is big, you have to have a gas membrane. You've got to make sure that you have actually a closed shell. And then beyond that is, protection and then auxiliary, how do you manipulate, how do you interface with it? Um,
yes.
Really beautiful. Now, a big question I have is that necessary on Mars? Would you have a totally different suit on Mars just because of the circumstances and the requirements?
Slightly different from a lunar suit, but the ambient pressure on the surface of Mars, it's a little bit different if you're high up or down in the valley, but the ambient pressure, generally speaking, is equivalent to about 100,000 foot altitude here on Earth. So it is nearly a vacuum. And
Holy shit.
I had a buddy who wanted to write a science fiction story about a guy who goes there, an explorer who uh, decides to try to physically adapt. Like the early mountaineers, they would go up and they were trying to climb Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen,
And
and
some of the
eventually
Sherpas can. Yeah.
they certainly do. So he wanted to say, okay, on Mars, could we physiologically adapt to Mars by removing our helmet for a short amount of time? Well, unfortunately, I would never say never. Human body is very plastic, but the numbers, the physics of it are very hard to overcome. So it looks like it's essentially a vacuum. It's called space equivalent conditions from a vacuum perspective. And so you do need a suit that maintains a bubble of pressure around you, such that when you take a breath, there's enough pressure pushing those oxygen molecules through the alveoli and oxygenating your blood. Below a certain point, you can't do that anymore, and we're not breathing at that point. Another very crazy idea. I read a book from the 1960s, early space exploration. Somebody proposed, let's get rid of breathing altogether, and we will just have a direct supply of oxygen straight into the bloodstream.
Whoa.
Maybe it's time to revive this madness.
Yeah,
if
that's
you really
wild.
wanted to get rid of spacesuits.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes it really clear then. You do need the spacesuit on Mars.
Yes.
The other thing that I'm really interested in and curious to, and this is a bit going to be a tangential conversation, but Venus is really interesting in that it's gravitationally almost identical to Earth. In the skies, there
Yeah.
may be very Earth-like conditions, and you're ballooning and lighter than air travel. I'm curious, um, could Venus actually be more hospitable in some ways if we can manage full-time sky living, which is not easy, but none of it's easy. So,
Apparently, it's somewhat plausible because on the surface of Venus, the atmosphere is about 200 times thicker than it is here on Earth. Now, so it's the air is 200 times denser. That means that you can rather easily do ballooning. If you have a balloon, it works on Archimedes' principle. It displaces, or it has a buoyant force of the mass that it is displacing. The thing is, people have sort of worked out, yes, you can do ballooning rather easily on Venus. Forget the extreme temperatures. It's like being in an oven, paper would burst into flame, all that. But for the moment, And exobiologists have suggested, I don't know the chemistry of it, but exobiologists have suggested that the atmosphere of Venus is a potential place for some form of life to have evolved. So many mysteries yet. You know, we've done the essential reconnaissance of the solar system, and it's been marvelous. We've got these incredible images, and they just say, "Come and see closer." You know, we've got to go back to some of these places, and see them more closely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, so back to the suits for a minute.
Yes.
Um, Open source is such a beautiful idea, and I know that's something that you care about, that you want to do. What are some of the things that you would like more minds looking at in terms of like sticky problems?
Well, the holy grail of pressurized suits is mobility while the suit is pressurized. In the movies, they never show you the reality of the sort of stiffened postures, yes, that you get while you're in a pressurized suit. If you look carefully on the moon, for example, they don't walk, they lope, kind of
Yes.
a springing. They're not striding, though. We will require something similar on Mars. I've been in a Mars gravity simulator, and walking also is not quite right. But anyway, all of these require some variety of mobility, even while the suit is highly pressurized. The pressure in the suit is about a third of Earth's atmosphere, so about 5 psi, or a little bit lower than that. Um, it's much lower than a bike tire. It's much lower than a soda can, but it's enough that once that suit is inflated, you can see some here behind me. Once the suit is inflated, it's rigid. It's absolutely rigid. I should send you a little video clip. And everyone in spacesuits has solved the essentials: maintaining thermal control, putting in O2 to breathe, and getting rid of your CO2. Essentially, those are pretty straightforward. It's being able to move while pressurized. So I'm starting to investigate things like origami, a variety of folding material that gets rid of gaskets and gets rid of some of the hardware that is traditionally used. Um, Astronauts, for example, in the space station are still getting joint injuries and minor pain from long stints outside in their spacesuits. Um, now those are pretty old generation spacesuits. They are functional. The Russian ones in particular are really beautiful marvels of engineering, as they say. Um, but they're old, and pretty much everything for space exploration can be reinvented. Needs to be reinvented. Um, for long-term human exploration and sustainability beyond Earth, not just popping up and coming right back down. We need all of our material culture, the objects that we use to survive and enjoy life. All of that needs to be reinvented and redesigned with space situations in mind. So there's room for everybody to contribute.
Yeah, and one of your quotes really stuck out to me, which was humans in space is insufficient for space settlement. And when I think about that, it makes me think of uh, a military complex, like sending one guy, like a pilot or something in versus families. It's totally different when you're thinking about living there. And so one of the big pieces I think also has got to be, yeah, you need suits to go outside, but you probably also need really good living enclosures that are, spacecraft homes.
Yes, we need livable environments. And if you go to a remote research station, for example, I've been to some in the Arctic and in South America, for example. You go to a research station where these small populations live, they're cut off from everybody, and they're there for quite a long time. And the first thing you notice is they cover the walls, which are normally plywood or something, concrete. They cover the walls with nice things, pictures. They all try to get some wood instead of metal and concrete, which is normally they have, just a little drawer that's made of wood instead of those things. So, um, the design and making places habitable and like Earth essentially, or I shouldn't say like Earth, but uh,
Beautiful
making
somehow.
yes, making them for enjoyment of life is very important, and I think recreation is also very important. We don't live to, put food in our mouths. We live to have some kind of enjoyment of life, and In Antarctica, the New Zealand Antarctic program actually allows their people to go out hiking and go climb Mount Erebus and sort of things like that. And they sort of make fun of the Americans because the Americans aren't allowed to do that. They have to stay in the research base, and it's too much paperwork and liability and all that. Anyway, on the project of humans beyond Earth, there should also be, investment in thinking about recreation. What are people going to do with their time aside from planting and keeping the engineering going and farming and all that? Um, they're going to want to write books. They're going to want to do art. They're going to want to do outdoor recreation, climbing mountains, that sort of thing. I think that's all great. I'm envisioning a human pedal powered craft to fly across the Great Canyon of Mars. Like, who could make it across by human power? Like they've tried to cross the English Channel by human power all these many, many times.
Love that. And that's actually one of the questions that I had, which is kind of related to that because I think that's fantastic and necessary. I mean, we need challenge, we need fun, we need enjoyment. Um, but directly related to your question, I'm sure you've looked a little bit about mechanically assisted uh, elements to the suit.
Yeah.
Talk me through some of your thought process around some of the challenges or opportunities around mechanical assistance.
Yeah. I was last year I was down in the Bay Area with a company called Suit X, like SpaceX, but it's Suit X, and they work on exoskeletons. And exoskeletons can be powered, which is it has a battery and it has actually servos that are doing things. So that if you're doing repetitive tasks like picking up boxes, this is taking some of the strain for you. And I thought that's great, but I don't like batteries. I'd prefer to do it passively, which is so that's a powered one. A passive one is simply a framework that you wear, and by tensioning a series of elastic or spring elements to the suit, it will assist you. So let's say you're picking up a box. At a certain point, it sort of kicks in and makes it a little bit easier. They also have these for skiers. So for the lower legs, which take a real pounding as you're skiing, right? These absorb a lot of the stress, and they now have these also for hiking for people who are going uphill and may have some trouble with their legs. This is an assisted device, and every time you take a step, you're saving with an exoskeleton. You're saving. The latest biomechanical report I saw said about 30% of the energy that you would normally use.
That's a
So
huge amount.
it's a huge, big figure. And there was a long run up to making sort of economically viable exoskeletons now, or it took a long time. People had the idea for a long time, but they're here now. They're largely used in industry, though. In
Lifting
particular,
boxes and yeah.
yeah, absolutely, and construction. I've seen really great ones where there's sort of a boom that comes over here, and if you're using a chainsaw or a heavy object that we've been holding like this for the last 100 years, tiring out the whole upper body, now you have this thing that it suspends it by a cable, and it just hangs in front of you.
That makes
What a
sense.
what a great idea! So I've been uh, the research how to integrate that with a spacesuit is a big research project, and it begins with a lot of literature review, just reading the literature and getting up to speed on that. I went there and I saw them and I met with them at Suit X, and it was really great. But then I kind of fell into I need to really decide exactly what I want. So I'm afraid I'm still in the books on that one. Haven't started to use physical objects yet.
Yeah, and I can see why it would be a big problem because, if you go the powered route, you're already fighting against, carrying stuff around. Now you have batteries or whatever. Like, I could see why that's not really optimal. I really do like the idea of mechanical kind of storing mechanical
Yeah.
leverage and energy and then reusing it when you need it.
Yeah. So yes, and I'm at certainly for the first generation of them, I'm going to be looking at the passive ones that simply use springs, where the energy is on board, basically, in the physical object itself. So springs or elastic elements. Um, they're not as efficient, or they don't save quite as much energy, but I think they're going to be very helpful.
What's interesting about efficiency, when you look at human systems or biomimetic systems,
Yeah.
um, they are, well, they're usually actually also very efficient, but they're one of the number one things is that they are disaster proof. Like that little skin under your tongue,
Yeah.
like you almost never need it, but you never choke on your tongue. So it's, it's like, it's a pretty important thing, even though you almost never need it. And I think there's a lot of interesting things like that. Like there may be, you know, other efficient ways to do things, but it's, what's not going to kill you. So when you're making a suit like this, I'm sure there are a lot of those questions of like, yeah, but which thing is not going to kill you? Let's do that. You know?
Yeah, I'm coming out of a period of, for a long time, I just got the suits to do what I wanted, and then I would move on to the next problem. So I never optimized. I never even necessarily had a great design. I had a design that worked. Now I'm sort of, okay, that's great, and it does the job. But, you know, somebody was putting on one of these suits the other day for the first time, and I mentioned to him that, it's okay to have some discomfort. Okay, it's rubbing here. Oh yeah, it's pretty tough to use the fingers. Oh yeah, parts of it are challenging, but you come to a point where you don't want the discomfort to distract you. And it's kind of like in the Arctic. You can only Rambo your way through the problem for so long before you realize, I'm just beating myself up, and that's not going to get me. That's going to get me very briefly for a short-term problem, but it's not going to work for long term.
But I
So
think, well, you go.
Well, I was just going to say, so applying that to the spacesuit design, yeah, I'm starting to make the suits rather more um, usable for people other than just a fanatic like me who I don't care if it hurts. I just want, I just want it to work. That can't be how it is for people. So I'm sort of going that way. And um,
Cool.
you're mentioning biomimicry, and it's it's a fantastic field. And there are elements of pressure design right now that are mimicking or giving us mobility that mimic evolved structures. For example, the lobster's tail, the way that it gives you mobility when it bends is in the same way that we get mobility on the pressure bladder inside the suit when it bends. There's a sort of a fold. Well, that's a very simple thing, but simple things oftentimes work, and I stick with them if I can prevent complicating. Somebody said once the best thing about biomimicry is that if you can start with, okay, what's my technological problem that I need to solve? May as well start by looking at biology and see if it's been solved by biology already. Because as they say in that, there have been 3.5 billion years of field testing, innumerable designs. And so good knowledge of biology and zoology and anatomy is very useful, I think.
Yes, super useful. And it's
Like
interesting.
behind you, I see you're surrounded by images of, things from the natural world. They're super
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. That's it's fun. And that's Gyotaku, the Japanese fish printing technique
Oh,
where
yeah, yeah.
you put a little bit of rice paper and some ink, and then you get this perfect print of the fish, which is kind of cool. Yeah, yeah.
Are those your own? Did you do those?
Yeah, I did all these. So these are
Oh,
I don't know if you
great.
can see them, but they're all bass. And
Wow.
yeah, and it's amazing how beautiful they turn out because it's so simple. Like you just put
Yeah.
a little bit of ink. Um, yeah, but it's you made a comment earlier that really made sense to me. You mentioned that you're looking at kind of going after some of those kind of less important problems like abrasion, a little bit of rubbing, a bit of discomfort. But that makes sense because when your stated goals, from my understanding, when you started this, was you wanted to take something that was $100,000 and make it $1,000.
Yeah.
That's a big effing deal. And so looking at like how it rubs on you, like that doesn't matter at the beginning. And your point
That's
about
right.
like build it is so important because so many, and I'm just copying what I heard you say in an interview, but so many people obsess, myself included, on these details that you think matter, but that maybe don't because they're based on assumptions that don't hold true. At the beginning of a project, you don't know what you don't know. And you have ideas
Yeah.
and you're going in directions, but if you start optimizing too soon, you're kind of
Yeah.
scaling error as much as anything else. And so, you know, it absolutely makes sense to me that now's a good time to refine because you have prototypes that are working and that have dramatically decreased the cost of this thing, which is kind of incredible when you look at it.
Yeah, the cost. Um, how do I describe it? The materials cost is very small. Now, at the moment, by that for a pressure suit that you would use, let's say on the moon, the materials should not cost more than a handful of thousands of dollars. The costs today come in. Well, there are a wide number. Sorry, there are a number of highly disparate reasons all contribute to the extraordinarily high cost of pressurized garments today. They have to do with the history, the long-term relationships between federal acquisition entities and certain companies. Uh, there is a research and development cost that they have to cover. However, I would say that that's largely been covered in the last 50 years. um, they do have overhead. There are companies that, they have hundreds of employees and so on. So I understand some part of the cost, but um, uh, an essential, a basic pressurized garment, and what's called a launch entry suit, which is just to get to orbit and just to get back down from orbit. It's normally worn pressurized for about 10 minutes. That is the 10 minutes you fly to orbit and the 10 minutes you come back. And otherwise, it's meant to be strapped in a seat on your descent or on the ascent. If the cabin loses pressure, it inflates, and then automatic systems come, take over and you land. That's pretty much all it is. That's a launch entry suit. Actually, I made one for a Singaporean pilot. He was flying in Australia, and his capsule lost pressure at 25,000 feet, and the suit inflated, and he descended, and he did fine. Anyway, I believe that was sold to him. I sold that to him for about $18,000, and that was a few years ago. And that cost largely represented not the cost of materials, which is a couple thousand. I was charging for my time in
Yeah.
constructing
Oh,
it
yeah.
and the years that I had spent, learning all of that. Um, Today, I'm still knocking those numbers down quite a bit. And that kind of suit, I don't think I would be charging that much today. But so that's comparable to 10 times less than it would normally be for
Well,
the.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the costs early in prototyping are
Yes.
sort of they're almost irrelevant because the economies of scale of real production in any industry um, dramatically. So
Yeah.
it's almost irrelevant now. It's like it's getting the design right now so that someday, as it's mass produced, it can hit those numbers. So I'm not expecting that number to be there right away. But another
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
on design.
Yes.
So doing a bit of diving. I mean, when I get those fish, I use a Hawaiian sling spear, so I'm
Oh, right.
diving
So
and
you're
free
diving.
diving.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
But one thing that I notice is that little things that you don't necessarily think are going to be a big deal can be a massive deal, like fog. And so when I look at spacesuit designs, I've always
Yeah.
noticed that they tend towards the monolithic sort of dome, whereas when you look at jet fighter pilots, they have, or scuba gear, you have a separation, which does make the fogging issue much easier. Maybe talk me through sort of design decisions going one way or the other.
Yeah. For a long time, I used an oral nasal mask like a commercial diver inside a helmet, inside a pressurized helmet, and it absolutely reduced the amount of visor fog. Visor fog is a persistent problem. Um, Even, the Felix Baumgartner, right, who jumped out of the balloon wearing a pressure suit at 130,000 feet or so. For one
Yeah,
hour,
amazing.
they cut the feed because his visor had fogged over. Now, if you look at who was advising him, who built his suit, who ran his entire project, these were the cream of the crop from the U.S. Air Force, whatever other agencies and so on. These are the absolute top people with the absolute top suit. And they encountered on that flight, problem number one is visor fog. People use diverters that spray the air that's coming into your suit or the oxygen that's coming into your suit to wipe it down. We use anti-fog wipes. We use gold filaments that you turn on an electrical heater. Still, you get visor fog. An
So hard. It's such a hard problem.
yeah, oral nasal mask is also like ski goggles. You can have two layers. I'm
Yes.
working on that one right now. Um,
Cool.
uh, Alan Eustace, who flew a balloon to beat the record of Felix Baumgartner a few years after Baumgartner, he wore an oral nasal mask inside his helmet, no fog at all. And the great thing was all of his CO2 and his exhalation went down out of the oral nasal mask into the suit below a neck dam, and it pressurized his suit. So he's
Oh,
using
elegant.
yeah, he was using his exhalations to pressurize his suit to keep up with the leak rate. It probably had some very little, but it probably had a leak rate. All pressure vessels have a leak rate. And also it immediately, because this is a one-way valve, his CO2 is not getting caught up in the helmet at all. It's exhaled directly and flushed away immediately. So he didn't use a rebreather. He just was breathing off of oxygen cylinders.
I
So
love elegant solutions. That's yeah.
those are great. Those are elegant. One trouble, though, is that the oral nasal mask, kind of hard to use if it gets sort of displaced or if you don't have a really good seal.
That's the other thing.
Um,
Seals, you see that a lot with diving. I mean, one little tiny seal,
yeah,
tiny leak, and it's yeah,
yes,
big problem.
you're
Big
going to the
problem.
surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, every design, right? Every solution has pros and cons. And I definitely think that the suits I'm working on are one of many that will come. I think that, for example, if you have people living on Mars or on a moon of some planetary body, there will be suits for mining, there will be suits for recreation, there'll be suits for exploration, all kinds. Hard suits, soft suits, compression suits, which is basically like it's like a very tight wetsuit. People have been working on this since the 70s. Instead of filling a bubble of gas around the body, which makes the suit rather big and bulky, those are the kind I make, very traditional type. By the 70s, a guy named Paul Webb said, why don't we just wear a skin-tight bodysuit and just have it compress the body, and this is providing the pressure that you require. Well, it's a cool idea, and he had some great experiments, but the materials weren't up to it in the 70s. Since
Vacuum is
that,
always hard.
vacuum is um, vacuum is very scary. It's absence. It's absence. It's kind of like cold. I realize once cold is the absence of things.
It
And
doesn't exist. It's just the yes.
no,
Yes.
yeah, and it kind of freaked me out. But vacuum, people have been working on the biosuit, which is the idea of basically a very tight pressure wetsuit. But there are problems with that. You've worn wetsuits many times, I'm sure. Imagine chafing, right? Problems of chafing. How many hours can you wear it? Sweating. How about resizing? How many sizes do you have? You have people with different body sizes. And the one really troublesome part of it is, I'm sure you've worn neoprene gloves, right? Imagine that the compression suit has to press on every piece of your skin, otherwise it's going to be subjected to this vacuum effect, the effect of vacuum. So that means that interstices, right? It's got to be pushing in there. Now think of other areas of the body.
I was just thinking of that. Yes.
Pretty tough. And I almost think that you sort of need a dip where you just you hang on and they dip you in a thing and you get like a temporary layer and then you come out and you use it and then you peel it off and recycle it or something like that. Anyway, my point is there will be all kinds of suits and I'm just working on one kind and but I love to see other people's projects working on other ones because I get to see somebody else's mind working on something rather new.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really nice. Oh, there's so many places we could go. Okay, genetics. Very interesting with Hyperion. If you're going to have a million person city, you've got to be pretty serious about inbreeding. You've got to be pretty serious about, the viability of a long term, culture. Um, and I think
Yes,
personally, you got to get pretty serious about health. And one of the
yes.
things that I've always been curious about is how can you manage health without ubiquitous measurement? And then what kind of measurement uh, would what's the minimum viable ubiquitous measurement to do this thing properly?
Mm, that's a great question, and um, in part, I think we'll know when people have started to do it. For example, what I mean is um, we've thought a lot with the Interstellar Research Group, and Project Hyperion has been managed by a number of different groups for a while, but right now Interstellar Research Group and Institute for Interstellar Studies. And we thought quite a while about how is it done? How do you get a bunch of people? They put together some money, they build a ship, and they take off for Alpha Centauri, let's say. Um, for a number of reasons, there's an alternative model that I favor, which is you build it and then you spend the first generation here in the vicinity of Earth and you test it out.
Yeah,
So that the people who are going, in fact, are totally accustomed culturally and biologically, they're accustomed to life on that vessel. And and essentially the idea, it wasn't just an engineering thing, it was also sort of a guidance to say, well, the culture who's doing it, we it sounds weird to say, okay, you're getting on this ship and you're going to go and do something, and it's like a directive from Earth. Much better if it is the culture themselves who decide we're going to do this project. Right? Um, so uh, the reason I started talking about that, right, this conception of having a generation, so 30, 40 years, where it's that ship is being tested and observed here in the vicinity of Earth. Um, I think then is when we're going to start learning a lot of things. And you're saying, what do you need to monitor? I think we'll know sort of after a generation like that. There has been a continuous human presence in Earth orbit for about 25 years. It's pretty amazing.
pretty
On
amazing.
either the ISS or the Russian Mir station, that sort of thing. For 25 years, there hasn't been a second of the second end ticking that hasn't been somebody in orbit. But I attended a space medical sciences conference a little while back, and they were pointing out that that's been really great, but it is all about the biology of microgravity, which is people floating freely. And I don't think anybody's ever proposed that you would float freely for 5 centuries while going to, let's say, Alpha Centauri.
We'd be
Everyone
very
invoked,
different creatures by the time
we're
we got there if we did.
very, very different. Everyone has proposed some variety of artificial gravity, which is, typically by rotation of the vessel somehow. Okay, uh, so the 50 years or 25 years of microgravity has some applicability to that, but largely what we need to know, we still need to do experiments or still have people living with artificial gravity, let's say. Small alterations in the breathing gas composition, the breathing gas pressure inside the vessel, the amount of sunlight people are getting, the solar so radiation and also cosmic radiation. Um, all of those have been we have scratched the surface of those, but it's also been from a paradigm of what's called flight physiology. Again, the expectation is people go up and they stay there for a little while and then they pop back down to Earth. And I think of it like diving. You go down, wow, it's amazing. But it's pretty nice to get back to, right? You get back to the surface. This is totally different. The concept of multi-generational success or multi-generational habitation of space by humanity, which I think is the long term the most important thing we can do as a species, is to diversify and spread out and learn about our universe. That's a totally different process, a totally different paradigm than flight physiology. Now it is into multi-generational sustainable health, biologically, culturally, technologically, politically. We have trouble doing some of that on Earth. but I think it's a good experiment. Okay, we have trouble doing it on Earth. Does that suggest that we just quit and say, nope, can't do it? I don't believe in that. And um, anyway, I think we're going to learn a lot of those things. Like, what do we need to do? How can we maintain such a system for centuries on a voyage to Alpha Centauri or wherever? How can we do that? We do it by planning it out. And as you're saying, what do we need to know to plan it out? And what I'm saying is, we know a little bit right now that we need to know, but we also are going to learn what we need to know in the first generation or so.
Yeah,
As
of course we will.
you're in uh, Ontario right now. I remember there's a an outdoor an outdoor person's sort of philosophy that comes, I think, from the fur trapping era in your region, and it was that you on the first night going away from the camp to go out to fur trapping, you never go more than just a few miles because you know you're going to forget something. You have to go back to camp. Good idea, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the depth of winter and you're snowshoeing or something like that. So there's a little bit of wisdom from people who did that sort of thing, and that I think that can be applied to space exploration also. Let's stick around close by for a little while and then make the big push.
Well, exactly what you just said. I've been thinking about in terms of analog space missions. So, you're involved with the Biosphere 2 through your position at Arizona, and
Yes.
um, obviously that was an incredible feat to spend 2 years in a mostly closed system,
Yeah.
socially, culturally. I mean, wow. Now, when I look at what's going on with analogs now,
Yes.
I see that they're predominantly very short, very sort of oriented around policy and procedure, and even with you mentioned diving with some of the work being done by underwater space habitat companies,
Yeah.
they're still looking predominantly at a month uh, as kind of a mission. And as we're talking about, I mean, if we have any chance of becoming multiplanetary, we need to be multi-generationally in these environments. And so when I consider what we have to do for analog missions, we for sure need to be looking at least semester long periods, to longer. I mean, years would be better, but what is your take on creating analog missions that are much longer duration, and where would you start?
A great question. I think personally, just off the top of my head, I would say seasonally. I would say let's do a season, 4 months. It's got a very distinctive beginning and an end. There's a reason, you know, to be there through that season. I've wanted to uh, convince the Mars Society to let us do a an overwinter up at the Devon Island base. But anyway, a season would be great. I'm talking with some people in Poland now, actually, who we might be able to do a season at a winter over in Antarctic base. Um, so I agree. I think a longer term approach would teach us more. There's this very interesting efflorescence of it's like in biology, it's an adaptive radiation, this explosion right now of Mars and lunar analog sites, right? There's one in Mongolia. There's one in multiple in South America. There's one in Iceland. I mean, they're all over. It's fantastic. And then there's this year to sort of corral things in a little bit and sort of shape up what they're doing. There's this thing called the world's biggest analog, right? Which is in October. And at the same time, many of these sites are going to have people undergoing sort of this simulation experience. Um, I think it's very much like I was saying before. What do we learn from them? I think we'll learn from them what we learn from them. Like, we don't necessarily always know exactly what we're going to learn. I think it's like reading a book or going traveling. What's the point? Well, I don't know necessarily, but I'll know it when I get back. I've observed something. I've thought about something in a new way. So I think a lot of those are going to have that. Are going to teach us things that we never anticipated, perhaps. Um, I've made suits for quite a few of them. Um, well, for a handful of these sites, and probably will be for some more. And I'm emphasizing using pressurized garments, um, which is a real, it's a very different world to wear a pressurized garment than a coverall, let's say. What they've been doing has been great and has taught us things, but they'll also learn a lot from wearing a pressurized garment. Just for example, operationally, if you think of anything outdoors, like your diving, your uh, even your sling, do you look at it? Do you ever inspect it?
No, every time. I mean, you got to make sure it's okay before you use it.
Right. So every item then requires uh, preventative maintenance and also repair on occasion. So spacesuits are the very same thing. It's just like an aircraft, really. You have a manual, you have a maintenance log, you have to write down everything you do in the suit if you really want to be serious about it and keep track of what you're doing. And if you have a problem, there's a fault in the suit, a best way to go about diagnosing it or think something that's going to help a lot is to go back and look at the log and see, oh, okay, oh, the same problem popped up, 2 years ago. Um, so my point is that design for sort of long term in these suits, we can learn about that in the analog sites as they use pressurized garments because they realize, oh, this is it. We're not quite where we are in the movies where you just slip it on and go outside. That's the goal. That'd be great if you could just put a pressure suit on like a jacket and go out. But we're not there yet, and uh, that's one of the things that's very different about a pressurized suit than a non-pressurized EVA walking around outside. Just thinking about the maintenance and the time and resources that it takes to keep the suit running. Just like a
Yeah,
Mars
I mean,
rover, if they have an ATV that they're driving around at Devon Island, those things I'm sure they have get maintenance. There's a tool kit, there's a tool bay where you work on it. The suit needs the same thing.
well, absolutely. And 2 points on that. I mean, in that document, we're talking 60-minute prep, 70-minute donning, 30-minute doffing, and another hour post-suit inspection. So we're talking like that's a pretty serious chunk of your day if you want to, put this thing on, take it off, and keep it working. Um, Now, on the keep it working as well, I was thinking about if you get a puncture in your tire,
Yeah,
like that's a little spacesuit. If you want to fix that puncture, um, there are, a couple ways that you can do it in the field. You can put some gum in there and that might work for a little while. But if you want to fix it permanently, you got to take it off the rim. You got to put that patch underneath, and it's
absolutely.
kind of serious. So it seems like you might be in a similar kind of situation with these suits where you're going to need to have patch on the fly because if you're in a pressurized environment, you have to keep it pressurized, and that's mission critical. So even if it's not a
Yeah,
permanent solution, you need a solution. But then you also need a permanent solution that's ideally, as it's fixed, it's at least as strong as original.
well, you bet. um, right now, the procedure for a leak, you always have awareness of your suit pressure, either from a gauge. In some suits, I use a blinking light. So as long as I see that green light in my peripheral vision blinking, I know that my suit pressure is okay. If it goes out or changes, then I know I need to address some pressure issue. Anyway, you're always aware of your pressure. Also, you can feel it. You know when the suit is not quite right. So, um, so what I was going to get into is if the suit loses pressure, for whatever reason, right now the procedure is number one, increase the flow of gas coming into your suit to keep up with the leak rate. And then number two, go to safety. And the reason for that is that it's almost impossible to find where the leak is. In the movies, they go, oh no, and they put a patch on it. um, well, what if it's on the sole of the boot? What if it's in the crotch of the suit? What if it's under the armpit? You can't find that. And to be honest, when you get it to the shop and you put it in the lab, what do I do to find those? I strip off the outer layers. It's a big job. And then I inflate it and I spray it with soapy water. That's how you find pinhole leaks. The repair of them is not so challenging. They can be pretty easily repaired, but uh, I think, I think I think I talked to a helicopter mechanic once, and he said it was about 8 hours of maintenance for a helicopter for every hour of flight. They have so many parts of a helicopter that if they fail, you're finished. So it's really critical. And I think that that's a really good job. They're well paid. So spacesuit technician is going to be a really well paid, super critical job for people living beyond Earth. Spacesuit technician. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, that's the difference between you being alive and not. So of course, like that's going to be a huge deal.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so another thing that I think a lot about when we look at the spacesuit, when we look at, living in these environments, the solutions at the beginning seem to be non-economic, mostly. It's like there is not a massive driving business imperative for even for spacesuits. I mean, there are obviously a few. There's going to be a few people buying
yeah,
spacesuits, but it's more of like we want to do this because we want to be able to, and it's like it's passion, it's energy, it's. I mean, there are a few people paying as well, but I think about the way that we're going to have to live in these places, and it feels similar in terms of, if you're going to build a home that, let's say, has water on the ceiling and walls to stop radiation from coming in,
yeah,
it's probably not economic in terms of doing that, but it may be the right answer.
yeah. Uh, for a while, it looked with this second space age that we're in now, which is characterized by more commercialization with all of its pros and cons, um, and with some, pretty concrete plans. Okay, let's say to Mars, setting up human populations on Mars. Um, in this second one, there seemed to be for some years. It's been going on, I guess, about 10 years now, and there did seem to be it looked like, wow, we really are on the edge of going to Mars, and suddenly we're going to need a lot of pressurized suits. Well, there's some, logistically, I'm not sure how quick that's going to happen. Eventually, there will be a requirement for many thousands of suits. There should be suits for children so that people can take their kids out on a walk into the valleys of Mars or the sands of Mars. Um, so uh, what I'm designing these days has no connection to any existing mission or architecture. It's not linked to Artemis or SpaceX or anything like that. It is very generalized, and it's really sort of exploring methods and technologies that eventually will become applicable. Somebody will use these. Um, I'm not looking to sell it. Um, I'm exploring the technology to have that piece of the puzzle, to contribute that piece of the puzzle to that project that I think is so important. So yeah, there is a business. There could be a business for pressurized suits. Many people have tried them. Well, many, maybe 5 or 6 people have tried it. It's one of the challenges is that each space mission and each vehicle that the suit is integrated with is somewhat different. So a Boeing capsule is different from a SpaceX capsule, different from a Roscosmos, different from the Indian Space Search Organization. They're going to build a human-rated vehicle. They're working on it. What do I mean by difference? Literally, I mean the electrical connectors, the plumbing, the hardware, and integrating. Every suit has to be integrated with the hardware of the ship. Um, so there is not a sort of need or a call for a single design, like I think one suit to rule them all. um, I think there will be a multitude. There will be a wide variety, and they each fit the different approaches. And I think the more approaches, the better. It's just like adaptive radiation in biology. If you have a lot of different approaches, then you have a better chance of one of them making it, rather than investing everything in just one way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Two things just came to mind.
Yes.
One is, like what about like a Zorb? Have you seen those big hamster wheel
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. Yeah. If you could get control of it, it'd be an interesting way to move around. And like I said, I think it'd be marvelous to have people mountain climbing or whatever on Mars, or wherever we want to go. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate rationale for space exploration, is for the enjoyment, for the great things we can do while we're out there. Um, Imagine the sports of the Olympics on Mars or the moon, you know. And again, to me, those are the things that give life meaning and interest and so on. It's not so that I can, you know, pay the rent. Um, so, yeah, a Zorb is an interesting idea. You'd have the limitations of a Zorb, but you could have the cool things about it. Didn't some guy try to cross the English Channel in one? I think he got in one and he started walking like a hamster, you know, and it got some water sloshed in and he was getting CO2 and everything. It was a crazy thing, but those are fun sometimes.
That's so fun.
Technically speaking, a Zord could do it. If as long as it could hold the pressure, you could have that pressure around you, and you could maybe there's a use for that on the surface of Mars, let's say.
Yeah, just kind of an interesting idea, especially if you needed to get into something quick and you just needed some protection or whatever.
Yes.
Another kind of thought, with the pandemic that just rolled through, and then these kind of violent reactions both ways, sort of to, we've all got to be on board to us, like this never happened. I kind of think about, what did we learn and how have we adapted as a population? And I worry that we really haven't. And when I think about spacesuit design, I think about also, like in Dune, they've got the still suit where,
Yeah.
you're reusing everything and whatever. And then I think, okay, well, I read this stat that if you are near a house that burns down and it has vinyl siding, your chances of getting cancer are really like way like orders of magnitude higher. And so there are moments where having some degree of respiration control or whatever, or pandemics or whatever it is, would really, really matter. And so I'm curious about like the minimum viable spacesuit that everyone should have just for like
Hmm.
safety. And what do you think
Yeah.
that might look like?
Well, during the pandemic, I got together with Dr. Kuznets, my sort of mentor for the last few years. He's the one who worked on Apollo, Project Apollo pressure suits. In fact, his first assignment was biological isolation for when they returned. And when the pandemic, so he designed sort of the filters and the ways that they would, isolate those guys for a few days or weeks before they, reintegrated with society back here. So that was on his mind. And then the pandemic came, and he called me and he said, "Hey Cam, let's make a Q suit, what he calls the Q suit, it's a quarantine suit, and it's a lightweight suit. It has a sort of a bubble helmet, so that not just a face shield that allows you to see a little better. It's easy to put on. It was cheap. It has two fans. They're drawing in air and filtering it, so they're filtering out any airborne pathogens. And then as you exhale, everything you exhale goes out filters as well. So if you have something, you're not spreading it to other people. So we created that, and some guy said he would, finance the getting the Food and Drug Administration or whatever to pass this for human, people. It's got to be certified or something like that. And then it became a business thing, and I was sort of out of it at that point. I was just in on the design and making the prototype. I think it's totally viable, and you could have them around just like on airlines. They have oxygen masks that pop out, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's one of those for everybody, and you know, uh, there should be stockpiles of things to prevent airborne pathogen. Um, what if that COVID had become lethal? I mean,
Yeah,
very,
what if it
very
was like
lethal.
Ebola? I mean, if it was
Yeah,
like Ebola, it would have been,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Or yes, what about if Ebola becomes airborne like that, right? Maybe it can. I don't know. I'm not a virologist, but uh, yeah, we should be prepared for something like that. Are we?
No, we're just not.
Yeah, I'm afraid a lot of lessons were not learned from that whole experience. It's really disappointing, and you, yeah, you have to press on. But that was a, yeah, that's not a highlight.
No, no, for sure. Okay, on a more interesting, well, that's interesting too, but on a more positive note,
Yeah,
um, in terms of the air, I know on Mars there's not a lot of oxygen, but I was thinking like, and I don't know how feasible something like this would be, but what about like metal organic frameworks that accumulate and preferably filter the oxygen so that instead of creating it and carrying around tanks, you're carrying around modular filters.
yeah, yeah. There's a philosophy issue in issue resource utilization on-site or in-site resource utilization, which means that when you go to Mars, for example, or wherever you're going, you utilize the resources that are there rather than hauling it all with you. And so, yes, people have worked on the chemistry of getting oxygen so that you don't take it all with you. You get to Mars and you start to, I don't know if they're splitting the CO2. Most of the atmosphere there is carbon dioxide, but I don't know if they're treating that. Another way to get it is to go to the ice cap. I think the North Polar ice cap is largely water ice, not CO2 ice, and that water can be converted to oxygen and other things. So, um, well, hydrogen and oxygen. So, yeah, in situ resource utilization uh, is definitely the way to go in terms of sustainability, and also I believe also in terms of livability. By that I mean if you look at the food again at these research stations, and a couple I've been very lucky to go to, they have the best food in the world because they know that people are going to go absolutely crazy. And you're doing your routine, you're doing cool physics and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're sitting down with everybody and you're having dinner or having breakfast. The food's got to be really good. And so they emphasize bringing really good food. And people, I think the first, you know, commercial boom on Mars would be, for example, people have the best restaurant. And they will be people, and they're not going to be serving canned food from back on good old Earth. They're going to be growing fresh things. People are going to want to have fresh, good food from right there. So, in situ resource utilization, doing things with the resources that are available, um, I think it's absolutely key. Uh, that's why I was interested in your profile, your description of bioregenerative and or bioregenerative, and essentially looking at all of this from the perspective from the beginning of how do we make it sustainable, rather than sort of like our civilization, which like wow, this is all so much fun, and then screech holding on the brakes and like whoa, we can't do this forever, you know.
Well,
There
yeah,
are there are microplastics inside all of our bodies right now. So
and
we've
when you
we've screwed
yeah,
up a bit.
we have screwed up a bit. And back to analogs for a minute. It's like when I see the analogs, the way that they're doing it, it's
Yeah.
still totally based on that same model of like, I mean, not totally. I shouldn't use absolutes, but
Oh,
it's
right.
largely based on bring your stuff and we're doing science. I think we should also be looking at a culture of pioneering. Like I would love to see super small scale mining and, aquaponics and really water filtration, like looking at the whole picture
Yeah.
and creating these mini systems because as you say, it probably isn't a one solution is the only one that we'll ever have. But unless you're creating these solutions, I mean, what you do in the Arctic will be different than what you do in the desert, but there are probably viable solutions to both, and it also feels more exciting. Like I think more people would be on
Yeah.
board to live in this kind of created environment that is, you know, regenerative.
Yes. You know, the biosphere was a great experiment in that. Um, the idea was a closed system, like a terrarium, and I was very lucky to have Linda Lee, one of the first biospherians, sort of give me a tour, and she still lives there. She just lives a few miles from the biosphere now. And she gave me a tour of the place just a while back, and I got a lot of the really interesting insight. Um, that was the concept. It was a closed system. How long, can we go for a couple of years in a closed system? It turns out, and those were a great experience. Learned a lot. Um, but it's too expensive to operate. It's just so huge. You know, there is a power. You know, they needed electrical power. They needed heating and so on. So um, it's just too expensive to run it on that scale. The biosphere is a huge structure, many acres. But um, at the space analog for Moon and Mars, what we've built, my colleague Kai Stotz, who's the director of Space Analog for Moon and Mars, SAM is what it's called. This is a small annex, and it is a closed system once again, but it's the size of maybe three of my apartment here, which is 750 cubic feet, square feet, so about 2,000 square feet, and this is being uh, it's being sealed up so that it is a closed system, just like you're talking. And their chief goal right now is to get away from chemical regeneration of the atmosphere inside to biological. So they're using plants to scrub the CO2 and to give oxygen rather than absorbing CO2 with soda lime or other chemicals that we've been using on the space station. So it is underway. There are some people working on that. Um, Maybe this year, 26, I think they're going to be able to. They've been putting in test crews on occasion, but I think this time they're going to actually be able to put some folks in there, seal it up, and start the science of a smallish, totally closed bioregenerative rather than mechanically regenerative system.
And that's very cool. Now, the only other thing that I would say seems to be important, and I don't know if this always happens, but when I do kind of research and I talk to people in regeneration, like
Yeah,
regenerative forest and agriculture, invariably it seems like the bulk of those people are almost anti-technology. It's like they're Luddites. They want to go back to the land, but I don't think that that's viable if we're going to be going to these resource scarce environments. Like we still need to be harnessing best in class technology, and we also probably need multiple ways to kind of skin the cat. So it's like, in Biosphere 2, when the oxygen ratio was off,
yeah,
it's like that might have been an interesting time for your hydrogen generator to be like just pumping, where we're cracking the water and we're making more fuel while we're making that. You know what I'm saying? Like it
yeah,
seems like having these multiple ways of attacking the problem, and really kind of like a big bucket of energy, mechanical, solar, hydrocarbon, whatever it is, nuclear, having lots of these at our disposal, it seems like it will be necessary, at least when we get into space, Mars, Moon, beyond. So we should start testing sooner than later.
oh, I totally agree. Yeah, that, like I said, the Project Apollo, with the humans on the moon, they made it look pretty easy. And we all know from watching the movie Apollo 13, by the second or third moon landing, people were sort of tuning out. Um, I'm mentioning that because I'm thinking about the leadership required to put a project like this together. It's very hard to do. They had a very distinct motivation. They had a Cold War motivation. They also did science because they didn't just land and then come home. They went back, up to Apollo 17. They kept going and they were doing science. But they had very clear objective, and they had good leadership within NASA that said, here's what we're going to do. And they had a directive from the President Kennedy who said, okay, by the end of the decade. And at that time, there was some variety of unity. There was some variety of culture that said this is worthwhile. The president said it's worthwhile. Let's do something because we believe in the system, the civilization, the country, and all. A lot of that is eroded, oftentimes for good reason. You know, for good reason, we've had a lot less trust in the systems, let's say, and so it's very hard to imagine how. I mean, I'm all over it, right? I'm deeply into the putting my energies into assisting space exploration of all variety. But I wonder and I worry, where is the leadership going to come from to to corral all of these ideas. You know, you were just mentioning a variety of different technologies, and I was sort of, I don't know about those enough, so I guess my mind went to sort of the logistics. So how do you, you know, you have to assemble a team of people, and they have to all get along, and maybe that's some of the things that we'll learn from these analogs, you know. Um, so, Fred, a little bit of a tangent there, but uh, that's because I don't know about those technologies that you're talking about. That's sort of where my where I could engage with that.
Absolutely. And I think that you're right. I think that it's a huge question. You know, it reminds me of, you know, cultural groups that do work. I mean, if you look at the Amish or the Mennonites, you
Yes,
know, it's interesting because they're kind of like analog astronauts. You know, they've got their area, they work the
that's right.
land, and
That's right.
they even have kind of interesting cultural artifacts like they've got this prodigal son thing, you know? You can leave, go. If you don't
Yep,
want to come back, don't, you know?
yep,
And I
yep.
think there's probably something to learn there.
Well, I think so. They've certainly learned how to live long term, preserving their traditions and so on. I'm sure they have problems in their communities as well, but they certainly have maintained a cultural continuity for quite some time without sort of some other cultures have done that, but they do it through repression. And these don't seem to be too particularly repressive. So yeah, I very much admire them, and I think yeah, we can learn a great deal from them. Um, so you know, there's this whole uh, field of sort of the cultural anthropology of long-term space settlement, and which cultures should we look to you know, to use as models. And I don't, I've looked a great deal about that. I've written a lot about that, and my conclusion has been that humanity is very adaptable, and I wouldn't suggest to necessarily copy any other, copy the Amish or the Japanese traditional brewers or anything like this. These institutions that have longevity. We can learn a little bit from each one, and the main thing is though that we recognize that there are tools by which humanity adapts and has adapted globally. They're called human universals. And all cultures, regardless, have, let's say, a concept of a family. Now, the family differs worldwide. In some places, it's a, a, a female with a male partner, monogamy. Sometimes it's a female with multiple males, multiple husbands. Sometimes it's a male with multiple females. The size of the family, how many people do you have cohabiting? A large family, like in traditional Germany in the 1920s or 1900s, very large family living in a farm. Or do you have small families? In Japan, in the turn of the century, much smaller families. So the point is, though, that all cultures have a conception of a family, a cohabiting related unit. It's an economic unit, cultural unit, so so we know that from anthropology, there are about 15 of these universals. And these are I think of them as the dials on an aircraft. And if you adjust them properly, your aircraft is flying properly. They're like the controls of an aircraft. And they're the adaptive toolkit of humanity. So that, for example, in the high Arctic, native people, okay, how do they dial their family dial, right? Well, number one, it is typically monogamy. It is typically a married pair, and they have very strict rules on population growth. They say we keep our population low because we want to remain mobile. They do have a tradition of when elders become disabled or can and think that to themselves, I'm no longer contributing to the group, they will literally take a long walk. They say goodbye to everybody and they're gone. I'm not advocating these same measures. What I'm saying, all human cultures adapt their cultures to their environment. And something of that, or something of that nature will have to happen as we go to different environments. So the reason I got into all that is that we were talking about cultures, right? And what I found in my research was that um, the any given culture is not a perfect solution, certainly for what's going to happen in environments beyond Earth. But the point is, we know the tools. We know that these are the 12 or 15 human universals that can be used and that all cultures use to adapt. Um, and then when you look at that, you'd look at the plastic range. What is the plasticity of the human culture, right, to adapt to conditions? I think it's entirely within our adaptive range to do that in conditions beyond Earth.
That makes me think of a number of things. I mean, one, I may send you an email later to get those 12 to 15 universals,
Yes,
but
yes, I've written a lot about it. I can send you some things. Yeah,
I would love that. And then
yeah,
the other is I'd be very curious as to tipping point factors that undermine the continuity of the culture. I mean, if we assume that 12 to 15 of these things exist and that they're all of weighted importance, let's say, like we can assume that they're not equally important, but they're all important to a degree.
yeah,
I'm sure that there are lots of examples of what is the tipping point? When do those cultures lose their glue, lose their ability to maintain and replicate?
yeah. Fantastic, great question. I looked at that, and it leads you into thinking about the phenomenon of societal collapse, just like you're saying. How what are the circumstances in which societies fall apart? Well, it's very fuzzy. There are a great many reasons. Many times, I mean, historians and anthropologists typically look at the or divide up the causes of a collapse between external causes, so attack from outside or challenge from outside, or there are also challenges from within the society itself. So that's the first big branching of, causes. Well, is it an internal cause versus an external? Um, Technically speaking, civilizations, if you look at civilization collapse, technically speaking, for historians and archaeologists, when the state is unable to carry out its essential functions that it specified. For example, in ancient Egypt, when the pharaoh was unable to protect the state from attack from outside, there's a widespread, pretty much revolt. People, what does that mean? What that means is people don't pay their taxes. They don't show up for military service. If the lawyers come, they ignore them. So and that leads to things like a collapse of the system, the legitimacy of the ruling classes basically falls apart. So, in a technical sense, that's a definition: is when the system, when the agreed system can no longer serve its basic functions, that's collapse. Another term for it is disintegration. It is the system. You need a financial system, you need long distance trade, you need manufacturing, and all of these are sort of intertwined. And when they come apart, then you are starting to see collapse. For example, if you think of modern civilization, let's say that you took out the capacity for commercial aviation because let's say it got too expensive to run those planes, or you couldn't afford to maintain them. It's a miracle that that system works. But or let's say the whole computer system went down for a very long time. Um, the knock-on effect of that, right? Many other parts of the smoothly running machine would perhaps start to come apart. So we know, the historical sciences, historical uh, historians, let's say, and some archaeologists have looked at, the collapse of many ancient civilizations and societies and tried to come up with answers. Why do they happen? We are much more descriptive than explanatory. That is, we know that this one fell apart at this time and this one fell apart at this time, but the explanations for them are very challenging. We have trouble explaining things like World War One. What was the cause of World War One? Many people are still debating. Or how about the fall of Rome? 476 AD, Rome, the Western Roman Empire collapses. Dozens, hundreds of books have been written about that, and yet every historian seems to sort of have a slightly different take on it.
Have you looked at the Calhoun experiments with utopic mice populations?
No, tell me about that.
It's really interesting. So he created these kind of ecosystems for mice with unlimited water and unlimited food and enough bedding material. And he
Yeah.
started with like a certain population of mice, and then he just kind of let them go and just see what happens. So basically, the idea was, you know, how what's going to happen? Are they just going to grow exponentially and then slow down? But what he found was kind of troubling. At least in these experiments, it was at first population just explodes like crazy, but then some stuff happens. Like there's all kinds of strange little perversions that start emanating through the society. You get these little despots. You have strong mice who have their little areas and their harems and they're kind of like submissive males within that region. And then you have this center that is kind of like the undesirables almost, like the people who don't have a tribe. And that gets more and more packed. And eventually, what happened, and this was the disturbing part, is that at a certain population density, um, social structure fell apart. Moms stopped building good nests for babies, and babies had no kind of social connection to moms and dads, and they called them the pretty ones. And so it was really interesting. There was this generation of the pretty ones which had almost no social connection, preened themselves constantly, and did not reproduce. So what you had was not a subtle decrease in population, but a cliff, just wham, where total population collapse. And so that's, I guess, one sort of dark side. But then to answer the other question, not answer, but to add something to it, you talked about how we don't really know why these things fall apart. And I thought, as you said that, it feels like trust. It feels like
Yeah.
money only works because we trust it.
Yeah.
Religion only works because we trust it. As soon as trust is broken in some fundamental way,
Yeah.
the system it's like the paper it's printed on, it just becomes nothing.
Yeah. I totally agree. The way I characterize it is that I'm sure somebody has said it before, but I don't have the words. I don't have their words. The way I think of it is that civilizations are held together by agreements. Like we agree to behave reasonably. If we crash into our cars instead of beating each other over the head, we're going to exchange information. Um, but when those agreements to behave in a certain way fall apart, um, I suppose that's one of the signs that that things are falling apart more generally. Um, and that I'm struggling because I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? Who cares? And I think it has to do with what you just mentioned, is it's trust. The reason I would try to beat a person or they beat me instead of sharing the information is we feel something so bad that that's the only way we have to address it. We don't trust that there's any other way to address it. So trust is super important, and agreeing or having an agreement on reality, like what's real. The air is something you breathe. Water is wet. Two and two are four. Um, and yeah, this is why well, it's one of the reasons why AI deployment of a lot of AI is pretty troublesome to me because everybody's so suspicious now. And we have sometimes very good reason to be suspicious. Is that thing real or not? Um, a huge amount has been written about sort of how all of this changes and slides you into a new variety of dark age by Carl Sagan, the astronomer, describing how he's doing this in the 90s, but he was describing how it's very easy, the Enlightenment values and civilization. This is all hard and expensive to do. It's much simpler to have a despot, to have a Führer, to have somebody who makes all the decisions, and the masses are just peasants. That's it. That is a very stable system, and that's how the bulk of history has been. We've had this 200-year, little tiny 200-year sliver since French Revolution, American Revolution, tiny little thing and the British, and we said, okay, we're throwing off the monarchy and we're throwing off religion. and that's only been in for 200 years, and in many places looks, precarious right now.
Yeah, and it is. And I mean, you know, if truth is eroded, which it already is
Yeah,
being eroded, I mean, people will say, "Oh, that was just AI." Like how are you going to be able to trust video in the next
right,
5 years?
right.
Or
I think
even, yeah,
I think somebody had suggested, I don't know how viable. Somebody had suggested some measures such that, counterfeiting uh, material that goes to the news or something like that should be punishable like counterfeiting money. I don't know how it would be done, but uh, yeah, it's really troublesome, and the the way that it could be misused, or the myriad ways that it could be misused, are, well, I think it already is to some extent. Um, uh, so the potential for it to do tremendous harm is huge, I think.
yeah, it's absolutely huge. I mean, look at the Matrix as the simulation theory is so compelling. Like already it's really, really so easy to imagine an indistinguishable video game. And so the
Yeah.
the obvious question, well then maybe it already is, It's, I mean,
Yeah.
that is a viable space plan, like in terms of how do you send people to Alpha Centauri? Well, maybe you plug them in and you have this kind of embryonic development for generations that leads to full humans in sacks, and maybe it's just simpler. And yeah.
Yeah. I think somebody had proposed, or I think at some point when I was talking about Hyperion, somebody had proposed that, and I said, well, that, I don't know the biology that well, but I can imagine that something like that could work. But I also said, based on what I've been able to learn about those human universals, and uh, both the biological and the cultural adaptation over time, um, it's better, or it would probably be better to do something that is already in human experience than to do something radically different. So arriving there with couple of colonists, or a few people, and then they sort of hatch all these these human beings and something. That's a brand new experiment. It's totally out of the human experience, and maybe you know uh, I suggested just send like living humans.
I
So
like I like the humans from just like a mythological perspective. I like the idea of going out and capturing asteroids on the way, and
yeah.
doing work as you're going, and having this kind of dynamic experience where you're not just a passive participant, you're
Oh
actively
yeah.
engaged.
Yeah. I started dividing up to sort of order my thinking about a 500, or let's say 1,000 year voyage to another star with 10,000 people. I said, well, how can I even wrap my head around it? Well, I thought, let's break down the time dimension. And so I thought about a departure age. This is the people who have some memory and some connections with Earth. And then there's an interstellar age. And those people have had knowledge of Earth. Then there's but will never reach the exoplanet, let's say.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah,
there's an interstellar age, and these are people who have no direct experience of Earth, and yet they will never have direct experience of the place that their ancestors are going. Their descendants are going to go. So they have, okay, and then an arrival age of people who no direct connection of Earth. They have some connection with the interstellar people that came before them. And now, though, they're going to have planetness again. And they have to become explorers, right? How do you become explorers if your culture, physical explorers, explore the resources and so on of a new world? How do you do that? And you have to have a culture of that. How do you do that if you have, spent the last 2 centuries, let's say, um, inside a gigantic can?
I think that's a really nice delineation between the ages. And I've put a little bit of thought into it as well in terms of how you would you know culturally do it.
Yeah.
And one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that if you had a growth culture and a ship that could build ships,
Yeah.
then what you may be able to do is have these population that grow to the point of fractured leadership, which always happens anyway. And that when you had a tribe that was willing to go out on their own, they could. Whether they wanted to go instead of like maybe Alpha Centauri is not the only, like maybe it's in that direction, but maybe hypothetically there are multiple, offshoots from there. And as the population grows and gathers enough asteroids or whatever it is, there can be these kind of decision points. And that's interesting to me because at least there's like a fruitfulness to it. There's this exploratory nature, and it kind of answers the question to a degree of like, well, how are these people going to still be explorers by the time they get there? And it's because they
Yeah.
never stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point is, to have something to do on the way.
Yeah, because if you
Um,
don't have something to do, we're meaning we want meaning so badly, and
yeah.
if we don't have it, it's people just go crazy.
Yeah. And I could imagine the the one element or dimension of meaning would be, well, I'm a caretaker. I'm taking care of this ship that's going to take care of my descendants. Uh,
That is meaningful, absolutely.
that's meaningful, but I don't think it goes very far. I think that could be like a religious type conviction that you carry around with you, but um, it's an interesting thing to think about. A family on a voyage, and they haven't been to Earth, and they're not going to reach the exoplanet. They know they're going to perish aboard this vessel. What is the purpose? Why grow food? Why get up and go to work? Why go to school?
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
know, and it seems to me back to your point earlier in terms of I do love this idea of decentralization and capability. I mean, if humans can become more and more technologically capable, I mean, you are just the perfect example of this. I mean, you're literally building spacesuits, in your home, just based on learning and, putting technologies together in a real way. And I think that that kind of a culture is a culture that it's hard to kind of extinguish the fire because there's always something you could make. You know what I mean? And if you were just taking care of something, you'd probably get really bored. Like just knowing your interests and that you love to push the limits. If somebody handed you the keys to a farm that was limited in scope and space, it would probably be hard for you to be motivated to really do that forever.
it might. I think it's related to what we were talking about before, is the having a trust and also having a valuing the system. As messed up as it is, I strongly value Western civilization because we had this experiment in the last couple hundred years of some variety of representative government, some variety of individual freedoms, and so on. And as badly wrong as that's gone, it's still, I think, worthwhile. So I believed in all that. Certainly believed in it when I was a kid, and I believe in the doing things for the collective effort, for the common good, for other people to go higher based on your efforts. So um, I think you could imagine that be, I think something like that would have to exist for certainly for the interstellar age. This is the people between those stars. Um, but yeah, I suppose we could say that of any age, why get up and why do anything? For a long time, there were religious reasons because that's what is proper to do. That's what the clergy tells me is proper to do. Um, and then we changed that in the last few hundred years. We said, well, because it's the pursuit of happiness. I want to have I want to have enjoyment of existence. Um,
Happiness is happiness is troublesome as a main motivator for a number of reasons. One of which you have no control over your emotions. They come and they go. It's like the weather. It's like if your religion was whether it was raining or not, like, and that's kind of like searching for happiness, because happiness happens. Certainly there are places you can go that are more rainy and less rainy. There are things you can do in your life that will more or less, but with hedonic adaptation, you don't really control happiness. And so for that to be a god, it's a slim god, and it's a constantly moving target. And so I think ideally we have something more profound than happiness, maybe more along the line of purpose, because at least purpose can be maintained even in dark places.
Yeah, I think, yeah, good point. That sounds almost Buddhist.
Maybe. I mean, it's yeah. I would worry that if happiness is the thing,
Yeah,
and then you have no happiness, well then what is next? I guess suicide. Like
right.
what are your next options?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about the next things that you're doing. What you're motivated, kind of excited about. I love how like tangential this conversation has been. I mean, it's just been fantastic.
Yeah,
What is
likewise.
what is motivating you in the next little while? What are you thinking about? What do you need help with? What do you want in the next little while?
Well, uh, the chief project I'm working on now with space technologies is the Mars Surface Exploration System, and this is a cart that you put the your life support, your oxygen system, your temperature regulation system, any supplies you're carrying. Um, that all goes into a cart on your that you pull behind you, and every culture since for the last 6,000 years, every culture that had a wheel recognized that, oh yeah, it's a lot easier to move things around on a wheel or an axle than it is putting it on your back. And there are other uh, advantages to using a cart. And I'm saying that this is one thing that would be used on Mars, or that would be useful for Mars and the moon as well. I'm not saying it is the only solution. People say, well, we'll just drive around in a pressurized rover. Sure, sometimes you will. But there may be times when you don't want to be in the pressurized rover. When, for example, I'm not going to go into this many cases where it might be useful to be able to walk around on the surface without having to rely on such a thing. Um, so we've built a couple of prototypes, and we're getting into the just a very simple biomedical verification. I know that the numbers and the 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 numbers are behind us. That it's going to be more efficient, and we're going to be able to carry a larger equipment load with less effort on an axle than on our backpack. But I just want the numbers to show that. I just want I want to have the table of numbers that shows those results. That's the justification. And then there's all the design of, oh boy, every aspect of it requires a design. How do you clip to it?
I was just thinking that, like, you probably want hands free if you can help it. So you probably want to clip at the waist. It's probably your most strong, comfortable place to carry weight. I mean, everybody. Well, you think about tree planters, right? And they've got these. They got to carry all these trees. Where do they carry them? On their
Yeah, right,
hips,
on the
you know.
hips, yeah. Yeah.
And so I've thought a lot about weight bearing and how you move a lot of weight, because and pockets, that really matters. But if you want the most, then yeah, like think about how a dump truck moves stuff. Like trailers really work. So you're thinking a human trailer, and there's two ways: you either drag it or you push it. But if you push
Yeah.
it, it's really like you get the problem of Buckminster Fuller, the
Yeah.
Dymaxion car.
Yeah.
Such a cool idea,
Yeah.
but that it's just like a dolly pushed in reverse. As soon as you go at speed,
Yeah.
even a little turn can be like a huge problem, and it can just
Yeah,
like
right.
wipe you out. And so if you're driving it forward, it's generally easier to drag from behind. There could be, heck, maybe you could have one that could go both ways, but I think in you probably want to drag it. But yeah, so okay, tell me, how are you thinking now? Is it side hip? Is it back? What do you like? How do you hitch it to yourself? Or
Right now, I simply have it's actually an old diving harness, but basically it's over your shoulders, and then there's a strap pretty high on your chest. Um, That's one of the things. And then there are two loops here, and I just clip it on with a carabiner. Other times, though, I've used sort of a backpack strap. I got rid of the backpack and I just kept the waist belt. And yes, I've attached there with a pair of carabiners. But um, I want to design the system to be very, very simple and to be done blind. That is, not having to look down at it. And I was thinking the other day, when I get in my car, I don't look at the seat belt. I just grab it and I do it blind, and it takes 1 second. So I want it to be something just as natural and easy and foolproof and reliable as that. So that I just, do a motion like this and I'm connected, or another one and I'm disconnected. So it's a lot of small design decisions like that, and either building or getting, the item that does that.
No, it's huge. And you think, like, what are the main ways that this has been done in the past? You have a wheelbarrow, which is the simplest way, but it takes your hands, and
Yep.
that's a problem.
Yep.
So you could have a wheelbarrow that was on your hip, that would work, but it decreases your movement a lot. You're really kind of, you know, and then you have sway, which is a huge deal. The way
Yes.
and working sway into the kind of design, like whether you have some kind of a spring, something that kind of absorbs. But yeah, no, and that's a cool project.
All those are things that we're finding out. So in the
Totally.
Arctic, yeah, yeah, in the Arctic, I learned a few things about, okay, you're pulling a weight behind you again, sort of with this waist harness, and I've got a pair of ski poles. Sometimes I'm on skis, sometimes on just on boots, sometimes snowshoes. But I learned about, okay, the principles of pulling a thing. And some of those are applying to this, but others are not. This is wheels, not sleds, not skis. Um,
One or
it,
two wheels. What are you thinking right now?
right now, it's got two very large wheels. They're meter high each, and they're massive. I'll show you just a moment. So there are two
Whoa!
of these, and they're on an axle. This is
Wow.
a Dacron cover.
Oh, I love Dacron.
The reason for the giant size is that mechanically, the greater the circumference, the
More
easier or the
efficient.
less force you're required to go over an obstacle.
Yeah.
The second reason, it's just like a snowshoe. The bigger the surface, the looser a substrate I can cover or I can go across easily, like loose, very loose sand. Um, we have one model that we're using just very big bike tires, um, but I like this one better. I have some acquaintances from Australia, and back about 15 years ago, they crossed an island. It wasn't Devon Island. Oh, it's Victoria Island in the Canadian Arctic. They crossed that on foot, and they used all kinds of different contraptions. They had to do it several times to finish it. And what they arrived on was a huge sled with all their equipment on it, with gigantic tires like this, that floated it up over these. Sometimes it was snow, sometimes it was sea ice, and sometimes it was sort of a bog environment. And they
Oh,
found
wow.
it
Yeah.
the most versatile tire. So that's one approach I'm trying now.
Yeah, really cool. And I can totally see how it's at the beginning, it's almost overwhelming because there are so many different approaches. But
Yeah.
I that to me looks like a strong approach. I mean, it's like, did you see the electric car that Dyson designed?
No,
It's worth a Google later.
I
They
will.
designed it. They figured it wasn't really economically viable. It would have cost $250,000 at retail, and they just didn't think anybody would buy it. But it
I
had
see.
massive, massive tires for exactly that reason of just
Oh,
efficiency.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. The bigger the circle, the less effort it is just to roll over a tiny little pebble, let's say. Um, like you can imagine a roller skate, right? If you're in roller skates and you hit a tiny pebble, you can't get past it. But this just rolls right along.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of like strength or like because if it's too flat, you get great grip, but it's also more friction. So it's kind of a pain to pull. So it's like the like a street tire on a bike, very fast but not much grip, or like a mountain bike tire, lots of grip, not as fast? Are you going somewhere in the middle, or what are you thinking?
Right now, I'm using a inner tube, a truck tire inner tube, with that cover on it to protect it. But I think ultimately it would be a metal. NASA actually has, well, of course, on the lunar rovers that they drove around the moon, those had a metal sort of a mesh tire.
I've seen those, and you can't pop them. They're just yeah.
That's right, yeah. And I'm definitely very aware that I don't want this to pop even during my testing. So I know that I would want something non-puncturable.
But that well,
Um,
with water, something non-puncturable isn't any good if it sinks. So
yeah,
there is
that's right.
something to be said.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so maybe you have to have a variety of types, that you could switch out. Um, but right now, yeah, just at the very beginning of it. And like I said, I just am looking for the heart rate data to demonstrate that it's easier to carry, let's say, 100 kilos on this than it is on your backpack. It
Right. I
just
guess that's
it
that's
just
pretty
burns
important. You need
burns less
validation.
burns less calories. I just want to show that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
how are you testing that to figure that out? Just get people to walk both ways, one with, one without, or
Exactly. Control experiment. So one person no backpack, sorry, one person just walking, and then they walk the same distance, the same surface, all of that uh, with 100 kilos on their back. This is a lot of weight, or let's say 50, and then measuring again their heart rate and whatever we need physiologically, and then have them do that carrying the same amount of weight on the cart. And I'm presuming that the heart rate is going to go down and that the caloric expense is going to be lower. It'd be very weird if it were higher, but hey, let's be positive. Let's be sure. Let's get the numbers to show it.
yeah, absolutely. And
I would hate
this is pretty. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd hate to go down the design path and then some physiologist says, "Oh no, actually, it's harder to pull a cart." So I want the numbers behind me before we pursue it. Sorry, what were you
Yeah,
going to say?
100%. Well, I was just gonna say a couple questions. I mean, I think what you're doing makes a lot of sense with the pressurized suit because if you have to carry around stuff, how are you gonna do it? Like, you really want to carry around your oxygen tank on your back? Like, I mean,
Yeah, again, on the moon they made it look easy, but the moon is 1/16th gravity um, of Earth, and whereas on Mars it's 0.38. So it's going to be a lot harder to carry that. And even I did the numbers once. Any conceivable uh, portable life support system on the moon, it was on a backpack. Any conceivable system, that is with new batteries and everything to make it lighter, on Mars is still going to feel about like 70 pounds. So 30 kilos, right? Um, that's doable for, a young person who's strong and motivated and all that. But how, day after day, day after day, day after day, that starts to get into sort of things that, military people do, are highly trained and for a specific mission. Not something you're going to do day by day or day after day. Um, so the
you
idea
know,
is make it easier to explore the surface of Mars. Yeah.
the other thing is that it could be like auxiliary as well. Like, let's say you still have your backpack option. If
Yes.
you had something that connected at the hips, and I don't want to throw your thing off, like the back is a beautiful place to attach it to, but then you could have your backpack and you could be pulling 100 kgs,
Yeah.
and or you could throw the backpack on there and now you got 150 kg or whatever, like there are interesting options.
Yes. A couple other options. One is um, you could have sometimes there could be a motor. There may be a case where you do want to have a motor and it's just giving you a little bit of assist once in a while.
Yeah, like a bike, the
Another,
way they like a bike
yeah,
assist.
yeah, like a bike assist, like on an e-bike. Another possibility is I definitely want to be able to get away from it. So I definitely want to be able to switch from the life support system on there, unplug everything, and I'm now on my own independent, oxygen supply. Let's say 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever. If for whatever reason I need to get away from it. By that I mean I need to go away from it. Let's say I want to explore down into a crater and I don't want to drag the thing down.
Gotta
Well,
climb up
maybe
a
I
mountain. whatever.
something like that. Um, so we're exploring that as well. Uh, there are so many design options. We've designed and built a prototype tent that basically we've done the numbers. If you had a liquid oxygen supply, several liters of liquid oxygen, you could afford in terms of the gas, you could blow up a tent that's basically a cylinder that's a meter across and 2 meters long, and it has a zipper. You don't need a metal hatch. It's a gas tight zipper. So I did this at Arizona last year. It's basically a big bag with a gas tight zipper, like the Zorb ball, but a cylinder. Okay, and I put one window in it so I could see outside. But basically, it's a cylinder with a gas tight zipper, and I climb inside. I'm still in my spacesuit, pressurized, right? I climb inside as though I'm on the surface of Mars. I climb inside it and I zip it up and I open a valve. There's a hose that goes to the Mars cart, leading to the liquid oxygen supply. When I open that valve, the liquid oxygen is now gaseous oxygen. It's coming up the hose into my tent that I've just zipped myself into. Now I can take my helmet off. I'm getting oxygen and pressure. And you can
See, that's
sleep
a
in it.
huge deal. That's a
You can,
huge deal because if you have a problem with your suit
that's
and
right.
you're out in the middle of nowhere,
That's
that
what
could
it,
be the difference between life and death.
that's what it's designed for. It was designed as an emergency shelter. My analogy was any seagoing ship has to, of a certain size, is required to have lifeboats.
Yes.
So this is kind of the lifeboat for your spacesuit. If your suit goes under, if you have some problem with your suit, you get in this thing, you zip it up, you've got let's say a 3-day supply, you turn on your radio beacon and call for help.
Now, just this kind of a technical, pipes going through stuff
Yeah,
seems so hard. So I assume that you have like a double male valve or something that you clip in and clip in.
that's correct.
Yeah, because otherwise it's so ridiculous. Like you
Yeah.
can't deal with. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they're gas tight fittings. So,
yeah. That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, so cool. Cameron, is there anything else that you want to sort of get into while I've got you? This has been so awesome.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks so much. Um, I want to know how to get into skin diving.
It's so fun. So it's really simple too. So basically, all you need is a mask and a snorkel,
Yeah,
and your spear. And so your spear is typically they're collapsible, about 6 feet long with a point. I've made several, and it's a piece of surgical tubing on the end.
yeah,
And so the way that it's propelled is you kind of put the surgical tubing in your thumb,
yeah.
and then you kind of pull, and then you hold the spear, and then you just release at your target. And then you're just snorkeling. So you're swimming around, and then you submerge when you're kind of going. And flippers. Flippers are pretty useful for this.
You use flippers. And do you wear a weight belt?
So sometimes yes, and it can be nice. You don't need a weight belt, but it's certainly if you have a suit like a wetsuit on, then highly recommend weight belt. I'm often in like lakes where it's not cold, so
Oh,
it would be
okay.
more cumbersome to have a suit on than not.
Yeah.
But if I have it, yeah, I like to be close to neutral buoyancy if I can help it.
And I guess as you're going down, you're equalizing.
Yeah, so I find it interesting with diving. It's like it becomes kind of subconscious where you don't even think about it. At the beginning, you have to think about it and you're equalizing.
Yeah.
But yes, you just kind of, as you go, you get more and more kind of accidentally competent at, not generating a ton of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. There's very little equipment. It's not like scuba where you've got all this masses of hardware you have to constantly maintain and everything. A lot of freedom, I think.
So much. I mean, literally, mask.
I've watched hours of freedivers online, and so go ahead. I'm very
Well, it's just
interested
what
in
you
that.
say. It's exactly that. It's like if you see a big fish or a little fish or whatever or if you just want to go free diving, but if
Yep.
you're in the kind of hunting mode and you want to get a fish, you could literally see one, grab your stuff, and go get it. You know what I mean? And there's something really exciting, but like I always found fishing kind of boring. Like it felt like gambling. Like am I or not? Whereas spearfishing is like it's hunting.
You can see it's there. Yeah, yeah.
and
Oh,
you're like
yeah,
in the
right, right.
element. So,
Yeah,
yeah, so it's
yeah,
thrilling.
yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, sounds
awesome.
great.
Cameron,
Well,
thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and
thanks for
I look
inviting
forward
me.
to hearing more about your projects and what you got going on. I'll certainly follow up with an email, and yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Cheers, Tyler. Thank you. And I'll send you a couple things I mentioned as well, a couple of things on those human universals, stuff like that.
Looking forward to it. Have a great day. Cheers.
Cheers, Tyler. Have a good one.
You too. Bye, Cam.